I'm Rebecca with 1C, and this is Silent Crash. Okay, here it is. 17 weeks ago, I told you that the story that Rebecca Bon Tucker, whose son Dylan is a catastrophic car accident survivor, called and shared with me made no sense. She said that auto no fault reform had gone into effect, creating a growing catastrophe. It set off my instincts, honed over 17 years in the story industries. In what she told me, something was clearly missing. A story underneath her story. A story that made it make sense. The reason this matters is because when you know the why of a story, then you can affect the what of the story. Let me put that another way. When you know why something is happening, then you can affect what is happening. I told Rebecca and you that I would try to find that story. And now I think I have. Before I share it, there are 3 important caveats to keep in mind. Number 1, I am human, and I can be wrong. Number 2, it turned out to be a confluence of little tales, some self-serving, some altruistic, swirling into the mix of a bigger story. Everything came together at once to birth PA 21 and 22. And had it not been for one of the characters being a little extra, it probably would have all worked out just fine. I will not be getting into all the side stories here beyond how they played into the larger story. And number 3, I did not fully believe this at first either. But with that one, I'm probably getting ahead of myself. So, dear listener of Silent Crash, let me begin with that age-old intro. Once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a little girl, a member of Generation X. Ever the eager adopter, she was the first in her junior high to get that newfangled technology called a mobile phone. It swung like a heavy brick in her book bag, and she could afford about 10 whole minutes a month on the thing with her after-school library worker job. Yes, young people, pay per minute is how cell phone use worked in the beginning. Our intrepid little middle schooler then entered high school. Gone were the leg warmers, out came the Doc Martens, along with an amazing new piece of technology, originally meant as a military thing, but now fully present in her classroom. People were calling it the Internet. It was clunky and accessed by a dial-up connection whose time to connect allowed our girl to pour an RC Cola, unwrap a Debbie cake, and have a convo with her godfather, the only member of her family who had an internet connection, before surfing over to an AOL chat room. And now we come to today. The girl is a woman, married with teenage children. Each of them carries an iPhone on which they text, snap, tweet, email, call, watch TikTok and YouTube and Netflix and Disney Plus, take pics, edit pics, shoot video, edit video, and then send everything their feverish fingers created, zooming through the cloud to one or millions of other humans almost simultaneously. That woman, of course, is me. Never did my 13-year-old self envision the connected world in which I now live. I had to remind myself of all of this as the story beneath PA 21 and 22 began to show itself. It originally came to my attention as a tip from a listener. I put that tip pretty low on the priority list because it seemed implausible and unrelated. Also, I was busy running down the history of a character in this story whom I had previously ignored, Senator Lana Tice. I'm embarrassed to say I think I ignored her because she's female. Other characters like Mike Shirkey, Dan Gilbert, and Mike Duggan, they had drawn most of my attention to that date. But during an interview one day, I was told, almost in an offhand way, to look into Mrs. Tice. So I did. I looked so long and so hard that I began creating a timeline that took over the walls of my office just to keep track of all of the money flowing into her PACs from insurance companies and people. Scouring publicly available records, I documented the creation of those PACs, the donations to each, her appearances at Rotary clubs and Republican meetings, her involvement in legislation, her travels, and more. In doing so, I came across the October 2017 quarterly statement for the committee to elect Lana Tice. Now, at this point, Lana had been serving as a representative for 2 years, and she was head of the insurance committee. In multiple ways, she had already gotten financially in bed with the insurance industry. You probably read about one more notable instance of this, the coverage about the Michigan Insurance Coalition donating $80,000 to the leading Michigan Forward Fund, which was a PAC run by Lana's husband Samuel, in September 2016. So here I was looking at the 2017 October quarterly statement of expenditures for her election PAC, and I see 2 travel reimbursements on page 1. Now, the first is for $1,633.12 directly to Lana. The other is for $869.67 to the Intercontinental Hotel in Chicago. I grabbed my pen and wrote, "Why was she in Chicago?" A bit of research later, I found a newsletter called the E&S Empire Express. A calendar on page 5 noted that the National Conference of Insurance Legislators, NCOIL, was set for July 12th through the 15th, 2017, at the Intercontinental Chicago Magnificent Mile. Turns out that 3 times each year, NCOIL meets to go over legislative matters regarding insurance. State representatives from a variety of states attend. Telling you about it now, I know it wasn't nefarious to see this on Lana's expense report. As the head of the insurance committee, one should expect her to go to NCOIL, just as previous heads of that committee did. But I did not know that at the time. I did not even know what NCOIL was. So I dug around and found the minutes of all of their committee meetings from every gathering every year. Now, can I just pause here and tell you how tedious it is to read minutes of meetings about insurance matters amongst lawmakers? Y'all, a lot of chocolate and caffeine were consumed here. But as my eyes crossed and I started to wonder just how much time I might be wasting, I turned to the page on the minutes of the Property and Casualty Insurance Committee meeting from July 14th, 2017. It took place at 4 p.m. that day at the Intercontinental. Lana was not listed in attendance, so I almost skipped it. Representative Weber, who is now, wait for it, an insurance agent, was the only Michigan person listed in attendance. But, in for a penny, in for a pound, right? So I kept reading. On page 2, a heading reads, quote, "Discussion on the use of big data and autonomous vehicles." That listener tip from before that used the word autonomous is the only reason I zeroed in on this. Driverless cars feels like a thing straight out of the Jetsons to me, eons away. Something for my great-grandkids to maybe, possibly consider. But remember the cell phone? As I read, I began to see that this technology is way farther along than I realized. So far that the insurance industry was already years into determining how it would impact their auto insurance product. And this was back in 2017. I turned to the page and I read, quote, Frank O'Brien from the Property Casualty Insurers Association of America stated that legislation on these issues is expected to come quickly over the next couple of years. A couple of years means 2019, when no-fault reform passed. Was this a coincidence or a lead? Mr. O'Brien said one of the questions they'd need to answer was, quote, does our current system of determining liability for accidents and compensating victims need to change? And if so, how? Now that felt pertinent. I grabbed the minutes from other meetings that happened that same day and saw that Lana had attended the NCOIL NAIC dialogue meeting as a member of its committee. And Representative Weber had attended it as well, even though he wasn't on the committee. NAIC is the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. Your insurance commissioner takes part in it, along with commissioners from plenty of other states. In the minutes of that meeting, which was held at 11:15 a.m. that same day, there's a section titled Discussion on NAIC Innovation and Technology Task Force. Let me just read you a few quotes from it. Quote, John Doak, Oklahoma Insurance Commissioner, stated that technology advancements drive change in every industry, and insurance is no exception. He went on, the very nature of the business of insurance is transforming, driven by technological advancements and social economic trends. He declared the NAIC is taking the lead in addressing these issues by creating the Innovation and Technology Task Force, led by Patrick McFarland, Director of the Michigan Department of Insurance and Financial Services. What? Why was Michigan's insurance commissioner being named as the head of this particular task force? Innovations of auto technology were happening in Silicon Valley and being tested out in other states. Why not their insurance commissioners? Was the autonomous vehicle stuff happening in Michigan already? I searched around and I found information about M-City. Have you heard about M-City? It's a sight to behold. It's a 32-acre mock city in Ann Arbor on the U of M North Campus. It was created 7 years ago so that people working on autonomous vehicle technology could test out the tech in a city setting that had no humans, just in case the tech failed. M-City officially opened on July 20th, 2015. In the announcement of its opening, guess who is noted as a major investor? State Farm. Then I learned that on May 25th, 2016, Waymo opened a 53,000 square foot, quote, development center in Novi. Waymo is an autonomous driving tech company. Its parent company is Google. It's a major player in this space. They already operate a commercial self-driving taxi service in Phoenix called Waymo One. I put this info on the timeline on my wall, and then I turned back to the meeting minutes. In the meeting, Commissioner Doak kept talking about the task force they were creating. He said, quote, the task force's mission is to provide a forum for discussion of innovation and technology in the insurance sector, to monitor technology and developments impacting states' insurance regulatory framework, and to develop regulatory guidance. I sat the papers down and thought, so here was the insurance industry in 2017 recognizing that autonomous vehicle technology and the big data grab that it represents is coming fast, noting that they'll need legislation in 2 years and naming the head of Michigan's diffs as the leader of the task force to figure it out. I glanced up at the timeline on my wall. There was Lana, just 2 months later, introducing HB 5013 in the House on September 26, 2017, to reform no fault. The Speaker of the House at the time was Tom Leonard, and he joined her, and Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan in announcing the legislation. Cranes covered it with a picture of all three of them. By November, the bill had failed, but Duggan told the Detroit Free Press, quote, "We've got more ideas, and we'll be back, because I'm not going to quit until we get something through." Remember, he had his own story thread playing out and weaving its way into this bigger tapestry. In February of the following year, 2018, Lana spoke to a group of Rotarians in Dexter, telling them, quote, "Insurance is where my heart is." It's quite a far distance from the biology major and chemistry minor, isn't it? The article says, quote, "Representative Tice told the group that there was legislation coming out of the State House soon that will do away with no fault altogether. She doesn't expect the effort to go anywhere, however. The introduction of the bill is more of a calibration to see where the lawmakers fall and gauge public response to the idea of eliminating no fault." Did you catch that? The idea was not to reform no fault. Lana had been attending NCOIL. The head of DIFS was the head of the NCOIL NAIC task force, trying to figure out exactly how insurance had to change with the coming new driverless and smart cars. They knew no fault had to go. And it looks like they were trying to get the lay of the legislative land before making a real attempt to do so. Suddenly, autonomous vehicles didn't sound as much like fodder for an episode of The Jetsons. Suddenly, I felt as old as I am, and I realized that I'd fallen into the trap of thinking that the world for the rest of my life will stay just as it is today. How could I have done this, given that my generation is the one that straddles the existence and the non-existence of things like the internet? Dumb move, Rebecca. But just because the autonomous vehicle industry was in Michigan, well, that didn't mean that it was definitely connected to changes in no-fault insurance, right? I couldn't see a connection, but a little niggling in the back of my mind, and that listener's tip wouldn't go away. So I set out to find the answer to this question. Does the advent of autonomous and/or smart vehicle technology mean that no-fault insurance has to change? My searches turned up article after article. From Marsh McClellan, "The Autonomous Vehicle Revolution: How Insurance Must Adapt." From Forbes, "Will self-driving cars disrupt the insurance industry?" From Accenture, "Insuring autonomous vehicles an $81 billion opportunity between now and 2025. That was published 2 years ago in 2020. 2 years ago, they were seeing an $81 billion opportunity. From KPMG Global, Trend 8, Auto Insurance Disruption, Increasing Importance of Telematics and the Move of Auto Coverage from Individuals to Vehicles. Article after article. The insurance industry was on this years ago. I was clearly uninformed, too busy raising babies, navigating a politically divided culture, and fighting to stay healthy during a pandemic to notice that the entire landscape of driving was shifting beneath me. That by the time my teenagers get married and have babies, a plethora of industry experts predict that the majority of vehicles on the road will be a mix of driverless vehicles and cars so packed with technology that driver error is almost impossible. Which is great, really. I'm all for my grandbabies not being in auto accidents. 94 to 96% of auto accidents are caused by driver error. If anybody knows how much a catastrophic car accident changes life, it's the survivors and their caregivers in Michigan. I feel pretty certain they'll appreciate efforts toward preventing crashes. My reading was educating me, but not answering the question. I needed to go to the source. I needed insurance industry professionals and executives, which is kind of a hard thing to need when you're the writer and producer of Silent Crash. Thankfully, I found some gracious executives. So there I was, needing some insurance leaders and experts to talk with me, to educate me about whether or not the auto no-fault reform legislation had anything to do with the autonomous vehicle industry. I was also dropping info bits onto the timeline as I found them. For instance, on January 9th, 2019, Lana was sworn in as a Michigan state senator. Her time in the House was over. Now she was in the Senate. 6 days later, Senator Eric Nesbitt introduced Senate Bill 1. Do you know what happened just 1 week after Senator Nesbitt introduced Senate Bill 1? Waymo announced it would be headquartering a factory somewhere in southeast Michigan. Remember, they had opened a development facility in Novi back in May 2016. Now they were looking to mass manufacture what they'd developed. They did not say they would headquarter in Detroit. They only said southeast Michigan at that point. Now, nothing legislatively happens with Nesbitt's legislation for several months, and that interests me. We know that it was being worked on. We know because the stakeholders have told us that meetings were happening involving the governor, the legislature, the insurance lobbyists, the hospital lobbyists, the no-fault lobbyists, and others. And we know because occasionally they would talk to the press. But only the people in those rooms really know what was being discussed. And only Governor Whitmer knows when she moved from being the staunch veto on anything involving no fault to joining hands with Republicans and agreeing to sign the legislation. There's a piece of info on my timeline that might have something to do with that. Remember, Waymo was wooed to Michigan by Republican Governor Rick Snyder. I can imagine how important it was to a governor of the state of Michigan, in particular, the home of Motor City, to get this major player in auto tech into its borders. Waymo's development center in Novi happened under Governor Snyder. Now it was up to a new governor to keep them in the state as they moved from development to manufacturing. I can imagine there's a lot of pressure when you're the governor of Michigan to not let the state lose its status as the one that drives the nation on your watch. Or maybe I'm chasing a rabbit trail. At any rate, on April 23rd, 4 legislatively quiet months after Nesbitt introduced Senate Bill 1, Waymo announced it had chosen Detroit as its base for manufacturing operations. Was that because they felt confident the insurance environment for their new technology was going to be legislatively made possible? 2 weeks after Waymo's announcement, legislative activity on Senate Bill 1 started up again. On May 7th, it passed the Senate, and it was sent over to the House. It was immediately referred to a special committee created just for it, the Select Committee on Reducing Car Insurance Rates. Can we talk about the name of this committee for just a second? Because the cynic in me thinks the name of it indicates the public story they had settled on at this point. No longer was the public story what Lana had said to those Rotarians. It was not about eliminating no fault. Now, The public story was about reducing car insurance rates, a story so unbelievable, it's absurd. Even now, 2.5 years after the passage of PA 21 and 22, Michigan is second in the nation for highest car insurance rates. This bill was not about car insurance rates, that's obvious. It only addressed no fault, which was not the driver of the premium hikes. But hey, points for consistency of message with the name of the select committee there. Anyway, the Select Committee on Reducing Car Insurance Rates met on May 15th and recommended the bill to the House for passage on May 16th. On May 24th, 2019, in an emergency legislative session, the H3 verbiage was put into the bill introducing things like the 55% of pay language. The amended bill passed the House, was quickly passed over to the Senate, where it also passed in the middle of the night. On May 30th, Governor Whitmer signed the legislation, thereby creating Public Acts 21 and 22. Did these events have anything to do with each other? I had read a lot, but I still needed someone in insurance to explain. Now, my co-producer here has said to me more than once, "It's not a no until you ask, Rebecca." In taking her advice to heart, I reached out to that investor in M-City, State Farm. They, in turn, sent me to the Insurance Information Institute, and I got some helpful information there. But I couldn't quite get my main question answered. Does this new way of doing vehicles have anything to do with the destruction of auto no-fault? So I kept going, getting higher and higher up the food chain. I talked with executives, with insurance industry experts who testify before Congress and state legislatures on insurance matters. They work with and for massive companies who influence and help write insurance legislation in states nationwide. If anybody was going to have the answers I needed, these guys would. I kept asking, so the changes to no-fault over in Michigan, they basically destroy the no-fault system. But I guess no-fault has to go away, right? Exactly, they told me. And Michigan, while having a unique no-fault program, is not alone in this. This kind of thing is being handled in other states too, to revamp insurance because of driverless and smart cars. I was gobsmacked. I mean, after 17 weeks of trying to understand why a piece of legislation that pretty much destroys auto no-fault in Michigan was passed, here were people explaining to me as easily as they'd explain why clouds drop rain and how it had to happen. And as I listened, I realized they were making sense. That was the hard part to take in. These weren't evil insurance executives bent on harming and killing the catastrophic car accident survivor community or its caregivers. That wasn't it at all. They were people trying to use insurance as a sort of business enablement tool to hasten the commercialization of driverless and smarter cars so that there would be less crashes, less people hurt and killed. The insurance has to move from personal to product, from the driver to the maker of the car. See, if there's a crash and there is no driver, or the car was so full of technology that driver error couldn't have caused the crash, well, then you can't blame the driver, right? The blame lies with the vehicle. But that's a layered answer because multiple companies are involved in making the vehicle. Let's say the crash was a Ford driverless vehicle hitting a smart vehicle with a driver. The driver is now catastrophically injured. Who is responsible for damages? Well, it could be Ford. Or it could be Argo. Ford owns a 40% stake in Argo. It, not Ford, builds the software, hardware, maps, and cloud support infrastructure to power self-driving vehicles. And by the way, lest you think other major car manufacturers aren't in the driverless car business, Argo's other major investor is Volkswagen. GM has a cruise test fleet that has hundreds of custom Chevrolet Bolt electric vehicles equipped with driverless technology. They expect to release a purpose-built autonomous vehicle that they call the Origin early next year. Jaguar, Tesla, Kia Hyundai, Audi, they're all in the driverless car game. But anyway, back to our make-believe crash. So Ford could be responsible, or maybe a component made by Argo is responsible, or maybe a third manufacturer was involved. Say, for instance, Orbitform, the company owned by Senator Mike Shirkey. Maybe Orbitform made the striker wires in the vehicle. They malfunctioned and contributed to the harm caused. Or maybe the 5G wireless connection that all that technology depended on went down, and that led to the crash, leaving the 5G provider, let's say Verizon, liable. See how there are multiple opportunities for responsibility and therefore liability? This is why the insurance product must shift from the personal to the product. The insurance will be for Ford, for Argo, for Orbitform, for Verizon, because it's not going to be about the driver error anymore. It's about the giant data set gathered by the vehicle the entire time it's in operation. That data will show exactly what led to the crash, whether it was the striker wire, the sensor on the bumper, the wireless connection dying, or anything else. The data will show the failure and therefore the liability, which is why Ford, Argo, and all the rest of them will have insurance. Wait a minute, I keep saying will. That's wrong. This insurance product already is in multiple cities across the nation. Right now, individuals are in beta groups with car manufacturers that allow them to hail a driverless vehicle. Some are even beyond beta groups and into the general public now. MLive published a story in August of last year about this being available in Grand Rapids. The city and the company May Mobility announced on August 11th, 2021, that the city's autonomous vehicle pilot had moved into its second phase, where anyone can summon the free curbside on-demand pickups. May Mobility uses the Lexus RX 450h for its autonomous fleet. 29 states have passed autonomous vehicle laws so far, according to autoinsurance.org, last year. The remaining states either had pending legislation or existing legislation that just hadn't gone into effect yet. These cars are on the road in multiple states already, which means the manufacturers of them are already insured in case a crash happens. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? As I talked to expert after expert, I kept having to make myself realize I wasn't being told about the future. I was being told about the present. A present that necessitates the end of auto no-fault schemes everywhere. As one source told me, defaulting to legacy ways of insurance simply won't work. Insurance has to evolve because the risk is evolving. And y'all, that's not a bad thing. They're creating a driving ecosystem that will prevent the majority of car crashes from ever happening. That's worth celebrating. But what about the 18,000 people suffering in Michigan right now because auto no fault has been reformed to the point of destruction? Well, it turns out that did not have to happen. Remember how I said a lot of little stories wove their way into this bigger story? I think maybe an insurance company or two saw a money opportunity and took it, and then others followed suit. Here's what I mean. As we know, the language of the reform bill did not go through the typical process in which all the stakeholders would have been consulted and the language vetted thoroughly by them or their legal representation. Just about everyone agrees that this contributed to a sloppily written bill. And part of that slop is the wording in Section 3157.14 that affects, quote, care rendered after July 1st, 2021. That and a few other places are what the lawyers fight about in court right now. If the law is regarding care rendered after July 1st, 2021, including care rendered to patients who existed in the system before July 1st, 2021, then the law is being retroactively applied. But remember that for a new law to be retroactively applied in Michigan, the legislature must explicitly say that retroactive application is their intent. Well, the insurance attorneys say that phrase shows intent. And then a judge has to decide who is right. But if the whole point here was to remove the no-fault insurance apparatus going forward in order to make way for an insurance product that covers the makers of the vehicles, a system that is ultimately safer for everybody on the road, well, then there's no need to retroactively apply the law. Progress, that new technology, that can happen even while the 18,000 current catastrophic car accident patients get their care. There just needed to be a sunset on auto no fault going forward. Are you picking up what I'm laying down here? The architects of PA 21 and 22 were, if my sources are correct, they were just trying to put a sunset on auto no fault so that the new, safer auto technology can be scaled up. Maybe those early legislative efforts, the ones that Lana said were, quote, meant to gauge public response to the idea of eliminating no fault, maybe they revealed that the public wouldn't allow for the elimination of no fault. So they went with legislation that eliminates it in another way, by cutting the reimbursement rates down so far that the caregiving agencies can't afford to keep taking on patients and extending the life of the system. By cutting friends and family attendant care rates and hours so far that they're unsustainable. By putting measures in place so draconian, the entire no-fault infrastructure collapses over time without a law having to say that's the purpose. They weren't necessarily meaning to hurt existing patients and care providers in the present. Not everyone involved knew, much less anticipated, that some insurance companies would try retroactive application of the new law. Quite the opposite. They were trying to be part of a major, worldwide shift in the use of automobiles that ultimately saves lives. And I'm going to guess that your governor, both the current one and her predecessor from another party, were trying to make sure that any developments in auto manufacturing happened in Michigan to benefit Michigan. But an unforeseen wrinkle happened. They didn't get the language airtight, and an insurance company made a money grab, leading to more companies making money grabs, and here we are. Now, I'm going to say something that initially sounds nuts. This is all good news. Because now that we know the why, we can see everyone's easy way into a what. Why was no fault reformed? It looks like the reason was to ultimately eliminate the no fault system and make way for a new insurance system that serves a safer way of driving. Well, that purpose is still served if the new law is not retroactively applied, which means it should be politically possible to pass a law that clearly states PA 21 and 22 are not to be applied to patients whose crashes happened on or before July 1st, 2019. It's a happily ever after for everybody. For the insurance companies, because ultimately they are just trying to end no fault so the new insurance products can take precedence. For the patients, because it keeps their care in place. For the care providers, because it pays them the rates that worked before. It's an end that happily enough coincides with what so many of you wrote in after episode 16. You clicked on the yellow "Here's What I Want" button at silentcrash.net and you told us your solution was to not retroactively apply PA 21 and 22. It's almost like you were in one of those choose your adventure novels. Y'all remember those from childhood? At the end of a chapter, you choose whether to open the door or say something or go home, and whatever you choose, the book would send you to a different page number. Well, the vast majority of you chose don't retroactively apply this law. I have floated these thoughts and your solution by lawmakers, insurance industry executives, patient family members, and patient caregivers. Pretty much the only reason to say no to a bill addressing retroactivity is there not being the $23 billion in the MCCA fund that they say there is. I mean, if the funds aren't there to pay the bills, then another entirely different why exists. But so long as the funds are there, as the MCCA claims, then passing a law clarifying that PA 21 and 22 cannot be applied retroactively should be agreeable to the interests of all the stakeholders. So there it is, listener. The story beneath the story, complete with an opportunity for a happily ever after for all. I'm Rebecca with 1C. Thanks for listening.
Follow and subscribe to Silent Crash, the quiet unraveling of Michigan's auto no-fault and the destruction of lives, wherever you listen to podcasts. For more information on what you've heard here and how you can help, visit silentcrash.net. Silent Crash is a production of the 1C Story Network. The show is written by Rebecca Seitz and produced by her and Rebecca Bond Tucker. Post-production services by Zischer LLC. This show is supported by the generous donations of concerned individuals via the Silent Crash GoFundMe effort. Learn more about the 1C Story Network at just1c.com. That's JUSTONEC.com.
The 1C Story Network, for the love of stories.